You'll have no doubt heard in the news if you live in the UK and Ireland that on the 13th of November 2020, Peter Sutcliffe, also known as the Yorkshire Ripper, had died, reportedly from complications due to COVID-19. Given the nature of this channel, it was inevitable that I would eventually cover this story. However, considering the circumstances, it makes sense to talk about this now, as there's naturally a renewed interest in the case, as well as a need to understand the inner workings of a man who mindlessly terrorised entire sections of the north of England from 1975 up until his eventual arrest in 1981. But before we talk about the case, if you're finding this channel for the first time, I make weekly true crime videos where I aim to upload every Sunday by 9 PM, British time. Every like, every share, every subscription and notification bell click is massively appreciated, as it really helps the channel grow and helps me to get those stories out to you. So if you're into content like this, I really hope you join me as I continue this journey. So with that out of the way, let's get into the video. To understand how Peter Sutcliffe became who he was, we need to go back to the beginning in order to work out why it all started. Sutcliffe was dating a woman by the name of Sonia Surma. She was a regular Saturday night date of his, and he also considered her his serious girlfriend. Sonia would be seen by Sutcliffe's brother Mick with a local Italian lad who was an ice cream salesman. When Sutcliffe confronted her, she wouldn't talk about the encounter or confirm the status of their relationship. This left Sutcliffe feeling humiliated and betrayed. After confronting Sonia, he decided to hire a prostitute as revenge for Sonia's apparent betrayal. He found a prostitute outside a petrol station and they agreed on the price of £5. However, Sutcliffe only had a £10 note, and so after giving this to her, she assured him that he would get the change later. When he got to the home of the prostitute, he had a change of heart and couldn't go through with sleeping with the woman. He felt disgusted with both himself and the woman. Eventually they returned to the garage to get the change, except when the woman entered the garage, she didn't return. One of the two men inside the garage came outside holding a wrench, banged on the car and said to Sutcliffe, "If I were you, I wouldn't get out of that car. You'd better get going." Initially, Sutcliffe refused, as he was still adamant that he wanted his change. However, when the woman came outside the garage with another well-built man, he left the garage, feeling embarrassed as well as completely outraged at the prostitute. He saw the same prostitute about 3 weeks later at the Lum Lane pub, where he approached her again with the intention of getting his change back. He told the woman that if he got his change, there would be no hard feelings. However, she thought he was a joke and had told other regulars in the pub about what had happened 3 weeks earlier. Sutcliffe said that before he knew it, most people were having a good laugh at his expense. In September 1969, approximately 1 month after the initial meet-up with the prostitute, Sutcliffe and his friend Trevor Birdsall were inside Trevor's minivan looking for the prostitute in question, with no success. Without warning, Sutcliffe exited the minivan and went up St Paul's Road. Approximately 10 minutes later, he returned to the vehicle, out of breath. He told Trevor to drive off quickly. Sutcliffe told Trevor that he'd followed a woman who bore no resemblance to the prostitute who duped him, up to a house and hit her over the head with a stone in a sock. He disposed the contents out the window of the moving vehicle. Unbeknownst to the men, the woman was able to note the registration plate of Trevor's minivan. Police visited Peter Sutcliffe's house the following day. He admitted to hitting the woman, but claimed that he struck her with his hand. For her own reasons, the woman, who was also in fact a prostitute, didn't want to take the matter further. Police gave Sutcliffe a harsh warning and said that he should consider himself very lucky. It also turned out that the woman's common law partner was serving a prison sentence for assault at the time when Sutcliffe attacked her. Within weeks of this incident, on the 29th of September 1969, Sutcliffe would be arrested and fined for, quote, going equipped for theft. However, the real reason which he concealed from police at the time was that he was going out looking for another prostitute to attack. The Yorkshire Ripper was born. The next confirmed attack wouldn't take place until 6 years later, when on the 5th of July 1975, Sutcliffe approached Anne Rogulski and asked if she fancied it, to which she replied, "Not on your life." She made her way to her boyfriend's home, concerned that he may be following her. She repeatedly knocked on his door to no response. Frustrated by this, she angrily took off her shoe and posted it through his front door. As she then made her way home, she was accosted by Sutcliffe, who repeated the same question, only to get the same response. She then began walking away, but after a few steps, Sutcliffe struck her on the back of the head with a hammer 3 times. Once she hit the ground, he removed her blouse and began slashing at her abdomen. He was fully intent on killing Anne, but was disturbed when a passer-by heard the commotion and called out, causing Sutcliffe to flee, leaving Anne alive, but seriously injured. She would eventually be found at 2:20 AM, where she was rushed to Airedale Hospital before being transferred to Leeds General Infirmary, where she would undergo a 12-hour operation, which also involved removing splintered bones from her brain. There were doubts she would survive the attack and was even given her last rites. However, she would pull through, but would understandably be severely traumatised by the attack. The following month, on the 15th of August, in Halifax, Sutcliffe was out with his friend, Trevor Birdsall, drinking, where at the Royal Oak pub, he saw Olive Smelt. Olive was out with her friends that Friday night. However, Sutcliffe believed that she was a prostitute who was working and looking for clients. Olive and her friend were offered a lift home by 2 men that they knew, which they both accepted. Olive was dropped off at a lay-by in Boothtown, which was a short walk from her home. She was hoping that her local chip shop was still open, as she would often go there after wrapping up the evening to get food for her and her family. As Sutcliffe and Birdsall were driving home to Bradford, Sutcliffe recognised Olive and stopped the car. Sutcliffe said that he was going to speak to her and got out of the car, seemingly sneaking something out of the driver's side seat. As he approached Olive, he made a comment about the weather, and as they passed each other, Sutcliffe turned and struck her twice over the head with a hammer. He then made 2 slash marks across her buttocks, approximately 6 to 8 inches in length, but again was disturbed, this time by a passing car with the headlights on. He retreated to his car and drove off. Trevor wasn't aware what had happened, but he noted that Sutcliffe was quiet, unusually quiet. Olive was found in the alleyway and was rushed to Halifax Infirmary and later to Leeds General Infirmary, where she would spend the next 10 days recovering from brain surgery. Like Anne Rogulski, she suffered severe emotional and mental trauma. Detective Superintendent Dick Holland, who was investigating the assault, heard from Olive that her attacker had a Yorkshire accent, as well as confirming that she wasn't in a red light area at the time of the attack. Trevor Birdsall read about the assault in the papers the following day and for a moment thought that Peter may have had something to do with the attack, but he failed to act on his suspicions. On the 27th of August, in Sildson, Sutcliffe would strike again, attacking 14-year-old Tracy Brown. As Tracy was walking home that evening, she saw Sutcliffe walking ahead and stopped briefly. He turned and looked at her, almost analysing her before turning back and continuing to walk, slowly. As Tracy caught up to him, they struck up a conversation, mentioning that there was nothing to do in Sildson. Sutcliffe would occasionally stop to blow his nose or tie his shoelace. When she was near the gate of her family home, he struck her 5 times on the head. Each time he hit her, she would weakly plead, "Please don't." Like the previous attacks, Sutcliffe was again disturbed, this time by another passing car. Before leaving, he threw Tracy over a fence. Drenched in blood, she managed to stumble her way to a caravan approximately 400 yards from where she was attacked. She would undergo neurosurgery, which would last 4 hours. A sliver of bone was removed from Tracy's brain during the operation. Tracy would recover and provide police with a detailed description of her attacker. The resemblance to Sutcliffe was scarily uncanny. Police also found at the scene wooden beads and a handkerchief, leading the police to believe the attacker may have suffered from hay fever, which Sutcliffe in fact did. Detective Chief Superintendent James Hobson would lead the charge to find the attacker. Despite having around 200 officers investigate the assault on Tracy Brown, they were unable to draw any leads. On the 30th of October 1975, mother of 4, Wilma McCann, was struck twice on her head and stabbed 15 times. her body was found on a sloping grass embankment on the following morning, 7:41 a.m, by milkman Alan Routledge and his 10-year-old brother, Paul. Initially, they thought they were looking at a bundle of rags, or an abandoned guy. It was when the pair got closer, it was then that Alan's younger brother cried out, "It's a body." She was found lying on her back. Her bra was lifted to expose her breasts. There were stab wounds located on her lower abdomen, chest and neck. Wilma McCann would be the first known murder victim of Peter Sutcliffe, although at the time, police would not link the murder to the previous attacks. This was considered by police as a murder carried out by an angry client of Wilma McCann's, as it was revealed that she was a prostitute who worked in the local area. Detective Chief Superintendent Dennis Hoban would lead a 150 police investigation team and conduct 11,000 interviews. However, the team were unable to identify the killer. On the 20th of January 1976, in Leeds, Sutcliffe would take the life of his next victim, Emily Jackson. Emily was a wife and mother who also worked as a part-time prostitute as a result of financial struggles the family faced at the time. Her husband agreed to and supported her decision to sell her body. On that fateful night, Sutcliffe would be the one who picked up Emily, and he would drive her to derelict buildings on Enfield Terrace in the Manor Industrial Estate. Pretending that his car wouldn't start, Emily then offered to help. While she was looking at the car, Sutcliffe hit her on the head twice with a hammer, causing Emily to collapse onto the floor. He then dragged her body into a yard, pushed up her sweater, cardigan and bra, as well as pulling down her pants. He would go on to stab Emily 52 times in the neck, breasts, lower abdomen and back. He also placed a piece of wood he found at the yard in between her legs. She was found the following morning by a workman taking a shortcut to get to work. When police arrived, they found her handbag, but nothing had been taken. They also found a boot imprint on Emily's right thigh, a size 7 Dunlop Warwick boot. This was a major find for the police at the time. Based on the injuries inflicted upon Emily Jackson, police quickly linked this murder to the murder of Wilma McCann. He would then strike again in Leeds, on the 9th of May that same year, after picking up Marcella Claxton, who accepted a lift from Sutcliffe. Shortly, Marcella asked Sutcliffe to stop the car so she could get out to urinate. While she was going, Sutcliffe walked up to her and dealt 8 or 9 blows to the back of her head with a hammer. He would quickly return to his car and drive off at speed. Covered in blood, Marcella staggered to a phone box and called 999. She required extensive brain surgery and received 52 stitches as a result of the attack, as well as intermittent blackouts. She was also 4 months pregnant at the time, and unfortunately miscarried the baby. Like Tracy, Marcella was able to give a detailed description to police about her attacker, although police would fail to link the attack to the earlier murders. On the 5th of February 1977 in Leeds, Sutcliffe murdered Irene Richardson. The murder took place in almost the same spot as his previous attack on Marcella Claxton. Sutcliffe hit her with 3 heavy blows to her head, one which drove her skull 3/4 of an inch into her brain. He then tore open her jacket and blouse and began slashing and stabbing Irene. The attack was so brutal, she had been disemboweled. After killing Irene, Sutcliffe placed her boots on top of her thighs, placed her bag neatly by her side, and covered the bottom half of her with Irene's own coat, as if to position Irene in a way he wished for her to be found, before driving away. He was scared away after hearing voices nearby, as well as a car being driven away from where he was. When Irene's body was found the following morning, police attended and began to investigate. Given the similarities with this and the previous 2 murders, they were now worryingly confident that they had a serial killer hunting in the Yorkshire area. The police were able to find a significant clue: tyre tracks which were left by Sutcliffe as he drove away. They were able to identify the make and model of the tyres, as well as the kinds of cars that would fit them. However, the only problem was that in the Leeds and the Bradford area, there were about 53,000 cars that were identified as potential vehicles that the killer could have driven. Nevertheless, police worked tirelessly to identify the owners of the vehicles so that they could interview the people who owned them and rule them out of their investigation. Police would interview approximately 30,000 of the owners on the list before stopping, as no new information had been obtained during their inquiries. Peter Sutcliffe, who at the time owned a white Ford Corsair, was on the list of 53,000 owners, but was not interviewed. However, police would learn that the attack on Tracy Brown bore a striking resemblance to the murders. Linking this case to the murders, they were able to use the photo fit Tracy had helped create to get an idea of the appearance of their man. Despite this, just over 2 months later, on the 23rd of April, Peter Sutcliffe killed Patricia Atkinson. Atkinson was a prostitute from Bradford. The manner of her death was similar to the previous killings, with one notable exception. The murder took place in her own flat. Police would find a bloody footprint on the mattress, which they would later match with the boot print they found on Emily Jackson, although no other evidence was recovered. By this time, police had visited 2,300 homes and had taken over 2,000 statements. Despite their efforts, nothing new was found. Police kept repeatedly hitting dead ends. However, the case would take a shocking and disturbing twist on the 26th of June 1977, after Sutcliffe identified his latest victim, 16-year-old Jane MacDonald. What made this murder especially worrying was that up until now, all of Sutcliffe's victims had been prostitutes. However, Jane was not. This sent shockwaves across the north of England, as now all women were now perceived to be potential targets of Peter Sutcliffe. The whole community at this point were gripped with fear by Sutcliffe's reign of terror. Following Jane MacDonald's murder, Assistant Chief Constable George Oldfield was assigned as head of the entire investigation. His first priority was to centralise the information gathered about the 5 murders into one place. However, the volume of information and paperwork taken was so large, there were literally tons of paperwork for police to sift through, cross-reference, document and compile. The floorboards where the information was stored had to be reinforced to support the weight. Simply put, the systems police had in place were just too inadequate. The overload of information would continue to dog the investigation, with devastating consequences. In Bradford, on the 10th of July 1977, Sutcliffe picked up 42-year-old Maureen Long and offered her a lift home. Maureen was not a prostitute, but had left her home in Farsley, Leeds, for a night out. Maureen told Sutcliffe that she lived in Bowling, and that she lived with a spoilsport ex-boxer. When they approached Rendell Street, she told Sutcliffe not to stop in front of the house. The pair talked, and Maureen agreed that if no one was at home, Peter could come inside. However, when she returned, she told him that she knew another place where they could go, and headed to Bowling Back Lane. Once they arrived, Maureen got out of the car to urinate. While she was, Sutcliffe approached from behind and attacked her in his signature style. There was light coming from a nearby caravan, which didn't stop Sutcliffe. At around 3:27 AM, a night watchman was alerted by his Alsatian, barking at what he mistakenly saw as a white Ford Cortina Mark II driving away from the waste ground at high speed. The night watchman, though, would not discover Maureen. She wouldn't be found until the following morning, after 2 women walking near the waste grounds heard what they thought was a baby crying. Upon closer inspection, they came across Maureen Long, whimpering. She was cold, severely injured, but miraculously still alive. She would end up spending 9 weeks in hospital with hypothermia, as well as recovering from her injuries. Police investigated the crime scene and found a partial bloody palm print, which they believed belonged to the serial killer they were hunting. Furthermore, as news spread that Maureen survived, Peter Sutcliffe believed that this was the end of the line for him. However, unfortunately, Maureen Long had suffered amnesia as a result of the attack and was unable to accurately provide a description of Sutcliffe. She was able to remember a white Ford with a black roof, which concerned Sutcliffe, but because of the inaccurate model described by the night watchman, this resulted in 300 officers checking thousands of cars, with predictable results. Sutcliffe would shortly thereafter sell the white Ford to a friend, but reluctantly took it back after it broke down. He then stripped the car down and redistributed the spare parts around his next car, a red Ford Corsair. As police were becoming more familiar with their killer's stomping grounds, Peter Sutcliffe decided to cast the net wider to throw police off his scent. He would travel to Manchester, and on the 1st of October 1977, he would murder 20-year-old prostitute Jean Jordan. Her body wouldn't be found for 9 days, until she was discovered by Bruce Jones, who at the time was a local dairy worker, but would be more widely recognised in later years for playing Les Battersby in the popular British soap Coronation Street. Police would notice that there were noticeable differences about the latest killing. First was the location, as up until now the killings were confined to the Leeds and Bradford areas, but now he was branching out. Next was the manner in which Jean's life was taken. In addition to the hallmark signature wounds inflicted by the killer, they also noticed that it appeared that he also tried to decapitate Jean unsuccessfully. There were also further injuries to Jean which were inflicted days after her death. This puzzled the police as to why he did this, although upon searching the area, they found Jean's bag, and within a secret compartment, they found a newly issued £5 note. This was crucial evidence, as they could potentially trace the note back to its original owner, as it was likely the note was given to the killer as part of their salary. They also found that Jean's body appeared to have been moved. This was evidenced by fly eggs found within the wounds of Jean, which belonged to a species which typically preferred shaded areas. However, when the fly eggs were found, they were positioned in direct sunlight. This meant that the killer must have come back after killing Jean to track down the £5 note, but was unsuccessful. Therefore, he tried to decapitate Jean and hide her head elsewhere in an attempt to mask the killing as a Ripper one, as this would also hide the head injuries caused by the signature hammer blows. Police were able to trace the note from the Bank of England back to Yorkshire, where police were able to compile a list of 35 firms who may have come into contact with the £5 note through their payroll. One of the firms identified was T&H W. Clark Holdings Limited. This company specialised in engineering haulage. It was also the firm where Peter Sutcliffe was working at the time as a lorry driver. Over 3 months, police would interview 5,000 men, including Peter Sutcliffe. His alibi at the time was that on the night in question, he and his wife Sonia were hosting a party at their home. This was backed up by his wife, as well as other family members, who Sutcliffe drove home on the night in question. Police found Sutcliffe's alibi as credible at the time, although it was later revealed that police had spoken to around 400 people that weekend before speaking with Peter. Sutcliffe would say that the police were so tired, he reckoned that he could have told them anything, and that they'd believe it. Therefore, failure to pin Sutcliffe to the £5 note ended up leading the police down another dead end. Police were urging women to stay indoors in light of the revelation that a serial killer was operating in the area and targeting women. However, the Leeds revolutionary feminist group organised a number of Reclaim the Night marches, which took place across various parts of the UK on the 12th of November 1977, where they protested over what was perceived as unfair treatment of women over imposed curfews on them, but not men. Sutcliffe would attack again in Leeds on the 14th of December, targeting 25-year-old prostitute Marilyn Moore. Fortunately, Marilyn would survive her attack and provide police with another photo fit, which bore a striking resemblance to Sutcliffe. Furthermore, police would again find tyre tracks left at the scene which matched tracks from his previous attacks. However, Marilyn described the car as being either a dark-coloured or maroon vehicle, roughly about the size of a Morris Oxford, when in fact Sutcliffe was now driving his red Ford Corsair. Furthermore, despite the accuracy of the photo fit, police were concerned that the description of her attempted killer was not reliable due to the severity of her head injuries. She had also contacted police on 3 occasions prior to her attack to say that she had seen the Yorkshire Ripper, only for these to be confirmed later as false alarms. Once again, police found themselves hitting another brick wall. In January 1978, police had discontinued their investigation into tracking the owner of the £5 note. Peter Sutcliffe would also strike twice. His next victim, 21-year-old Yvonne Pearson, was murdered on the 21st in Bradford. Her body would not be found until 2 months later, where she would be found hidden under a discarded sofa. Unlike the other victims, Sutcliffe would beat Yvonne to death, kicking her head and body. He would even jump on her with the full weight of his body. When Yvonne was eventually found, police found horsehair taken from the sofa, which had been stuffed into her mouth. This was to silence Yvonne after another car pulled alongside the driveway nearby. He would then murder 18-year-old Helen Whitaker in Huddersfield on the 31st of January. He wouldn't attack again until the 16th of May 1978, where he targeted 40-year-old Vera Millwood from Manchester. All women worked as prostitutes in their respective areas. After the murder of Vera Millwood, the press had now dubbed Peter Sutcliffe as the Yorkshire Ripper. Police would step up their efforts in identifying cars which appeared within the community's red light areas. This task involved logging the registration plates of cars as they passed through these areas. In particular, police were searching for vehicles which appeared in 2 or more districts. One name would keep cropping up as they did this: Peter Sutcliffe. He was cited 3 times in Leeds, once in Manchester, and over 70 times in Bradford, although it was the sighting in Manchester which qualified him as a triple area sighting and warranted speaking to. He was visited again by police, where Sutcliffe would explain the reason for the numerous sightings in Bradford was due to this being part of his route home from work. He would also deny visiting Leeds, stating he hadn't visited there in ages and had no reason to be there. Police, however, were not satisfied with the explanations provided and scheduled a follow-up visit, although this follow-up meeting would not take place, because what happened next would take police on an entirely different path on their search for the Yorkshire Ripper. Sutcliffe went back to targeting women who were not prostitutes, as he knew now that police were monitoring closely the red light areas. On the 4th of April 1979, in Halifax, almost a year since his last murder, Sutcliffe targeted 19-year-old Josephine Whitaker. Sutcliffe, who had earlier been out drinking with his friend Trevor Birdsall, and after dropping him off home, had driven to Halifax in his now new car, a Sunbeam Rapier. He had sold the Red Corsair after the gearbox became faulty. After circulating a quiet residential district, he drove towards Savile Park. He saw a few people walking their dogs in the park, but he also noticed Josephine walking home alone. After parking up the car and taking out his hammer and screwdriver, which was sharpened at the ends, he caught up with Josephine and asked her if she had far to go. She told him that she had been to her grandparents and had quite a way to walk. Sutcliffe tagged along. As they approached the park, Josephine told Sutcliffe that she would normally take a shortcut across the field, to which Sutcliffe sinisterly replied, "You don't know who you can trust these days." As they reached 30 to 40 yards from the main road, Sutcliffe saw a clock tower and asked Josephine for the time. As she was reading the time, he lagged behind, while complimenting her on her good eyesight. It was at this point when he struck. During the attack, Sutcliffe noticed someone walking by. He dragged Josephine into the shadows, approximately 30 feet from the main road. However, as he was crouched over her body, he was shocked to hear voices closely behind him. He saw 2 people hurrying across the field. They passed by Sutcliffe by mere feet. He then continued his attack on Josephine. She was stabbed 21 times in the chest and stomach, 6 times in the right leg, and Sutcliffe had also thrust a screwdriver into Josephine's genital area. Her skull had been fractured from ear to ear. Her body would be mistaken for a bundle of rags by a bus driver at around 5:30 a.m, who reported this upon arriving at the bus depot. The police were not informed at this point, as they didn't feel it was required. However, at around 6:30 a.m, Jean Markham, who was waiting at the bus stop, noticed what she also thought was a bundle of rags, until noticing a shoe nearby. When she realised that she was looking at a body, she rushed home and called police. Police contacted the bus depot at 7:20 a.m. to request they move the bus stop away from the crime scene. It was at this point that the report submitted by the bus driver earlier that morning was in fact a body. Initially, police thought that Josephine may have been involved in a hit-and-run incident and dragged herself to where she died. However, once the details of her injuries became apparent, they soon came to the grim realization that they had another Ripper murder victim. Police found yet another boot print at the scene. This time, they were able to identify that the print came from a right boot, which had a worn-down area, giving police the impression that the person who wore the boots could be a long-distance driver. Yet again, this was another clue which pointed the finger squarely at Peter Sutcliffe, although there would be another vital clue that police would obtain, which would send police down an entirely different route of inquiry. Between March 1978 and the end of June 1979, 3 letters were sent from a man claiming to be the Yorkshire Ripper. The first and third letter were addressed to George Oldfield directly, while the second letter was sent to the Daily Mirror. However, it wasn't until George Oldfield was sent a tape on the 17th of June 1979 that the man claiming to be responsible for the Ripper murders would be heard for the first time.
I'm Jack. I see you are still having no luck catching me. I have the greatest respect for you, George. But Lord, you are no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started. I reckon your boys are letting you down, George. They can't be much good, can they? The only time they came near catching me was a few months back in Chapeltown, when I was disturbed. I warned you in March that I'd strike again. Sorry it wasn't Bradford. I'm not quite sure when I'll strike again, but it will be definitely sometime this year. I'm not sure where. Maybe Manchester. I like it there. There's plenty of them knocking about. They never learn, do they, George? I bet you've warned them, but they never listen. Well, it's been nice chatting to you, George. Yours, Jack the Ripper.
The voice on the tape had a noticeable northeastern accent, hence he was dubbed Wearside Jack. The tape was sent for examination to determine its authenticity. Yorkshire police enlisted the help from the FBI, who along with other senior officers working the case, determined the letters and tape to be nothing more than a sick hoax. Despite their findings, Oldfield was convinced that the tape was genuine and centred the investigation around identifying potential suspects in the Yorkshire area with links to Castletown, Sunderland. Oldfield now centred the case around eliminating suspects who failed to meet the following criteria: shoe size 9 or less, blood type B, works or lives in Yorkshire, has a distinct Geordie accent. The police would launch a campaign which included 5,000 billboards, advertisements in over 300 newspapers, and even dial the Ripper hotlines, which people could call to listen to the tape at any time, in the hope someone would recognise the voice. The publicity campaign alone would cost an estimated £1 million. Voice experts would continue to express concerns over the validity of the tape, but their opinions would fall upon deaf ears. Police would also carry out follow-up interviews on around 40,000 men in the Yorkshire area. One of the men was Peter Sutcliffe. Andrew Laptew would be the man responsible for interviewing Sutcliffe. Upon sitting down with him, Peter would inquire why he was being visited so often. He would also say that his own work colleagues had begun calling him the Ripper in jest due to the amount of times he was spoken to by police. During the interview, Laptew felt as though something wasn't quite right about Sutcliffe. He came across as cagey and unresponsive. Furthermore, Laptew noted the striking similarities between Sutcliffe and the photo fits survivors of the Ripper provided, the fact that his shoe size matched those found at the crime scenes, and his employer being one of the companies identified as being a potential place where the £5 note may have passed through. Linking this together, Laptew drew up a report identifying Peter Sutcliffe as a potential suspect for the Ripper murders. Despite the overwhelming evidence in favour to support his theory, and rightly so, one thing didn't match: the accent. So, when Laptew submits his report to his commanding officer, he outright rejects the report, apparently for this reason. Laptew was left stunned. Tracy Brown, one of the surviving victims we spoke about earlier, had the tape played back to her by George Oldfield. Upon listening to the tape, she told him that the voice wasn't his. However, Oldfield appeared convinced that this was a mistake on Tracy's part and would continue to focus the investigation on the accent of the voice in the recording. At this point, Sutcliffe had been interviewed 9 times by police and yet was still not strongly suspected. Now seemingly in the clear, he would go on to murder 20-year-old Barbara Leach in Bradford on the early hours of the 2nd of September 1979. Barbara would be another victim that was not linked to sex work. In April 1980, Peter Sutcliffe was arrested, except it was for drink driving. While awaiting trial, he would murder 2 more women. First was 47-year-old Marguerite Wells, a civil servant from Leeds on the 20th of August, and Jacqueline Hill, who would be his 13th and final murder victim on the 17th of November 1980. Jacqueline was a 20-year-old student in her 3rd year of an English degree course. On the 25th of November 1980, Trevor Birdsall, friend of Peter, would finally report his suspicions to the police regarding Sutcliffe. However, the information he provided disappeared into the mountain of paperwork the investigation team were working on, and as a result, was never followed up on. By this time, George Oldfield had been taken off the case, and the tapes were now being viewed as discredited. Despite this, there was disarray with the investigation. As a result, 6 people at the top of policing were brought in to bring new energy to the case. This team would become known as the Ripper Super Squad. One of the men, Stuart Kind, a forensics expert, was able to pinpoint that the killer was likely to come from Bradford based on his geographical profiling. On the 2nd of January 1981, 2 police officers carry out a routine stop in the driveway of Light Trades House in Melbourne Avenue. The area is known for its use by prostitutes. The man they speak to in the car was Peter Sutcliffe. One of the officers, Robert Hydes, carries out a registration check on the vehicle, where he discovers that the plates on the car are fake. Upon this discovery, Sutcliffe was arrested and taken to Dewsbury Police Station, although police would allow him to urinate in public as he was desperate to go. The following day, police would interrogate Sutcliffe over the Ripper murders. Despite Sutcliffe matching the profile built by police, without concrete evidence, Sutcliffe would be released on bail. Upon returning to the scene of the arrest, police found a hammer, knife and rope he disposed of when needing to go to the toilet. Furthermore, a second knife was found in the cistern at the police station after he was allowed to use the facilities there. When they went to Sutcliffe with their findings on the 4th of January 1981, Sutcliffe said, "I think you've been leading up to it." When he was asked what they were leading up to, Sutcliffe responded with the following: "The Yorkshire Ripper. It's me." He was asked to remove his clothes for forensics. He removed his trousers to reveal an inverted V-neck sweater underneath that had been pulled over his legs, where the V-neck exposed his genitalia. The area around his knees were also padded. This suggested a sexual motivation for his crimes. Peter Sutcliffe was charged on the 5th of January 1981 for 13 counts of murder and 7 counts of attempted murder. Sutcliffe would claim that he was driven to commit the crimes after hearing voices from God, which began during his time as a gravedigger. He would plead not guilty to murder, but guilty for 13 charges of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. 4 psychiatrists would diagnose Sutcliffe with paranoid schizophrenia, although the judge residing over the case would reject the diminished responsibility plea, as well as the testimonies of the experts in favour of a trial by jury. His trial began on the 5th of May 1981, and after 2 weeks, Peter Sutcliffe was found guilty of murder on all counts and sentenced to 20 concurrent life sentences. The judge at the trial said that Sutcliffe was beyond redemption and should never be freed. However, he recommended that Sutcliffe serve a minimum term of 30 years before being eligible for parole. Following his conviction, Sutcliffe adopted the maiden name of his mother, Coonan. He was sent to HMP Parkhurst on the 22nd of May 1981. Although he was considered sane during his trial, Sutcliffe was later officially diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. However, he was not sent to a secure psychiatric ward, as all attempts to do so were blocked. On the 10th of January 1983, James Costello, a career criminal, attacked Sutcliffe after following him to the F2 hospital wing of HMP Parkhurst, where he twice smashed a broken coffee jar over the left side of Sutcliffe's face while he was getting water. The attack left Sutcliffe with 4 wounds and requiring 30 stitches. He also went into mild shock and needed surgery to repair superficial muscle damage. Sutcliffe was eventually transferred to Broadmoor Hospital on the 27th of March 1984 under Section 47 of the Mental Health Act 1983, where he would be treated for his paranoid schizophrenia. In 1989, Peter Sutcliffe's wife, Sonia, would separate from him, and the pair would eventually divorce in 1994. On the 23rd of February 1996, Paul Wilson, a convicted robber, entered Sutcliffe's room and asked if he could borrow a videotape. Wilson then attempted to strangle Sutcliffe using the wire from a pair of headphones. Sutcliffe screamed for help and was rescued by murderers Jamie Devitt and Keith Erskine, the Stockwell Strangler. It was said that Wilson had a deep hatred towards sex offenders and that he was resentful at being locked up with them. Just 13 months after the attack by Paul Wilson, Sutcliffe was then attacked again on the 10th of March 1997 by Ian Kay, who stabbed him in both eyes with a Parker rollerball pen. Ian Kay admitted that on the day of the attack, he was intending to kill the Ripper. Sutcliffe would go on to lose sight in his left eye as a result of the attack. Sutcliffe would also be diagnosed with diabetes in 2003. In 2004, Peter Sutcliffe's father died after battling bladder cancer. On the 17th of January 2005, he was allowed to visit Grangeover Sands, where for 30 minutes he visited the spot where his father's ashes were scattered. The decision to allow Sutcliffe out for the day drew widespread criticism. The Home Office at the time stated that former Home Secretary David Blunkett was the one who granted permission for compassionate parole, which was later ratified by then Home Secretary Charles Clarke. A Home Office spokesperson also stated that Sutcliffe was closely monitored at all times and did not pose a threat to the public. While some believed that to refuse Sutcliffe this leave would be a violation of his human rights, as well as inhumane, others, including the family members of Sutcliffe's victims, questioned whether their thoughts were considered when this decision was made. Richard McCann, son of Wilma McCann, said at the time, "When I heard he'd been to the Lake District, I was just speechless. I often go there walking, and I'd hate to think we ever stood in the same place. He says he's depressed about his father's death. I was a week short of my 6th birthday when he killed my mother, and I've suffered bouts of depression my whole life. I've thought and thought about whether he deserves any compassion, and I've decided he doesn't." Fabian Hamilton, who was Labour MP for Leeds North East at the time, and whose constituents included many family members of the victims, opposed the leave and saw no reason whatsoever as to why this should have been allowed to happen. However, Tory MP and former Prisons Minister Anne Widdecombe said that if the Home Secretary had refused compassionate parole, they might have lost a very public human rights action lawsuit, drawing out the anguish of the victims' families and ending in Sutcliffe being let out anyway. On the 22nd of December 2007, Sutcliffe was yet again attacked, this time by fellow inmate Patrick Sureda. While hurling obscenities at Sutcliffe, Sureda lunged at him with a metal cutlery knife, aiming for Sutcliffe's right eye, but missing and hitting his cheek. Sutcliffe did not require hospital treatment for this attack. This was the last known recorded attack on Sutcliffe I could find. On the 17th of February 2009, it was reported that Peter Sutcliffe was deemed fit to leave Broadmoor. An application made by him was put forward to set a minimum term to his prison sentence, thereby allowing the possibility of Sutcliffe being put forward in front of a parole board and potentially let free. The case was heard on the 16th of July 2010 by the High Court of Justice. After reviewing the evidence, including the history of his crimes, his mental state and psychological reports, the High Court decided that Sutcliffe would never be released. Sutcliffe appealed this decision, and the hearing for his appeal began on the 30th of November at the Court of Appeals. This was rejected on the 14th of January 2011. On the 9th of March 2011, the Court of Appeal rejected Sutcliffe's application for leave to appeal to the Supreme Court. His fate was now sealed. In December 2015, it was declared that Peter Sutcliffe was no longer mentally ill, and by August 2016, a medical tribunal ruled he no longer required treatment for his medical condition and therefore could go back to prison. He was moved from Broadmoor to HMP Frankland in Durham, County Durham, sometime in August 2016. Peter Sutcliffe died on the 13th of November 2020 at the University Hospital of North Durham. It's believed that he refused treatment for COVID-19 after having been treated for a suspected heart attack a fortnight earlier. His 4 surviving siblings have all stated that they would not be attending their brother's funeral, although his ex-wife Sonia and a friend of Sutcliffe's, a funeral director, will be the only attendees. While initially, upon capturing Peter Sutcliffe, Yorkshire police were elated that they got their man, Lawrence Byford was tasked with reviewing the investigation. The 1982 Byford report found that there were serious errors in judgment by the police, the most notable being Oldfield's insistence to lend credence to the Wearside Jack tapes and letters. Furthermore, the report revealed that the major incident room was largely ineffective due to the volumes of unprocessed information, failure to connect vital pieces of information, which allowed Sutcliffe to slip through the net on so many occasions. The report also heavily criticised the major incident room for allowing Sutcliffe to slip by after Andrew Laptew had listed him as his prime suspect. The report also highlighted the failure of the team to identify and connect previous attacks to that of verified Ripper attacks, including failure to connect photo fits created by both Tracy Brown and Marilyn Moore, and conclude that the same person had carried out the attacks. The report did acknowledge that an investigation of this scale had not been seen before, and that the officers who worked on the case did so diligently. However, improvements to the existing systems would need to be implemented in order to ensure men like Sutcliffe aren't able to slip through so easily. Many of the tools police use today are a result of the Yorkshire Ripper case. While it's assuring that police are much better equipped to handle large-scale operations, it's a crying shame that it came at such a high price to life. It wouldn't be until 2005 where police would get a breakthrough in identifying the person responsible for sending the Ripper letters and tape, after a review of the cold case found a small piece of gummed seal on one of the envelopes. After obtaining DNA from the envelope, they were able to match this to John Humble after he had supplied DNA to police for an unrelated incident in 2001. Humble was arrested on the 19th of October 2005 and admitted to being the culprit. At times he expressed shame for his actions, but denied he had perverted the course of justice. He also told police that on 2 occasions during the Ripper hunt, he anonymously contacted police to inform them that the tape and letters were a hoax, but these were discounted at the time. On the 21st of March 2006, he was sentenced to 8 years in prison. He would be released in 2009 and given a new identity. He would pass away on the 30th of July 2019 from heart failure and the effects of alcoholism. Thank you for watching. If you made it this far, I really appreciate you taking the time to support what I do. I spent a lot of time researching this case and learned a lot on the way. Now that Sutcliffe's dead, I hope the victims of his crimes can get some kind of peace of mind, knowing that the world just got a little bit better without him in it. If you want to see more content like this, I've set up a playlist which has all my true crime videos so far. Also, please like, share and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel. So yeah, until next Sunday, take care and goodbye. For now.